My name is Rick Hickman. My parents are June Renee Hickman and Elise Hickman, Volker. Volker was her maiden name. Um, and I was born in Manhattan, New York, October 23rd, 1953. Um, my parents were both born and raised in Salt Lake City, although my father was actually born in Provo. Um, I guess he grew up there, and at some point he went to the University of Utah. They moved to Salt Lake City to the Yale Ward um, up on the east side there. Can't remember the name of the street. Gilmer Drive is where the original house was, and then they moved to Yale Avenue. My father had many experiences in his early life that he told me about growing up in that neighborhood. Um, all of the prominent members of the church lived in that area. Many of them, the Romneys, the Smiths, um, and so he was pretty well connected in his early youth. And he grew up was just a wonderful example of a young LDS man. Um, and At one point, he entered a contest that was put on by the Fisher Coach Company, which was actually part of GM. Um, they don't do it anymore, but if you look at cars that were made in the 60s and maybe early 70s, and you open the door, you look down onto the little plate that divides the door jamb from the carpet. There is a little picture of a French coach, and it's the Fisher. It would say "Body by Fisher," and so the Fisher Coach Company, which goes back to when they actually made horse-drawn carriages, um, became this company, which was a component of General Motors. And they would put on a competition where they would give competitors the plans for this coach, and they would by hand cast the metal and build every little thing. And my father built an unbelievable. The windows rolled up and down, had the upholstery inside, had little glass windows. I mean, Randy currently has this coach in his office, but it's. I looked at it and I marveled at what he did, and he cast the metal for these ornate. I don't even know what they're called, but they're the corners of this thing had little eagles on them and scrolling work and all this, and he did all that. Anyway, it was a beautiful project that he did, and he got second place in that competition, and so he was very talented and at a very young age. And my mother was a talented musician as well. My father was a singer, and my mother played the piano all through her early life. And when she was a little girl, she she performed once in church, and it was in sacrament meeting. And when she came home, I think her father asked her, he said, "How did your performance go?" And she said, "Oh, it went wonderful. Everybody clapped." And of course, that was kind of a fib because you don't clap in church, but it was kind of funny that she was embarrassed. But anyway, she grew up on 13th East, and that little neighborhood. She went to the gosh, I can't remember the name of her ward. It's right there, just off of. Anyway, the building still stands, and her house still is there as well. So
Where is the church?
it's on 13th, just off of. Oh, it's the Highland Park ward, is what it was. It's a Tudor building, and to my knowledge, it's still there. It's a big, beautiful old church. And she just lived like a block or two from there on Highland Drive. Yeah, Highland Drive and 13th are like right close there. But so that was her neighborhood, and so they're both from Salt Lake. My father, June Hickman, um, his uncle Harold owned and operated the Jacob Lake Lodge in Jacob Lake, Arizona. And my father, all through his youth, would go down and work there, and had many experiences. He would wander through the forest collecting arrowheads, which were all over the place. I remember a box that we had of unbelievably, I mean, beautiful Indian arrowheads, and one of them was a tomahawk head that it was as smooth and shiny as marble, with a clear notch around it where, you know, they would mount it onto a stick. And but there was he had some awesome experiences growing up there. I remember one time he said that back in the woods they found this old like Model T Ford that had been abandoned there, and he had mechanical skills, and so they drug it over to, you know, to the place, and he took the head off of it, cleaned everything up, and, you know, it had rust and different stuff, and used the same head gasket, which you never do, you know, but he made it work, and they got it running, and he drove that thing around, you know, the mountain there for, you know, years that I know of. But he was very ingenious, very mechanical, and very talented. So one summer, he was working there at the lodge, and my mother had taken a job at the Grand Canyon Lodge, which is just, you know, a few miles down the road from Jacob Lake. And she would play the piano in the Grand Canyon Lodge and work there. And one day, on her day off work, she went up to the Jacob Lake Lodge, and she went into the curio shop, and my father sold her a pair of moccasins, and they got to talking, and they discovered that they were both from Salt Lake City, and they were both musicians, and things led to things, and after the summer they met up and became an item in Salt Lake City. They would perform together and in various churches and, you know, sacrament meetings, and anyway, the rest was history. They married, and our family began. So
did your mom play the piano and your dad sing?
yes, yes, they were. My mother would accompany my father, and he had a beautiful tenor singing voice, and so they were quite well known. And subsequently, at some point, they became engaged and married in the Salt Lake Temple. And these were the war years, and so my father was in Army ROTC at the U, and he graduated with a commission in the U.S. Army, and he got orders to go to Fort Sill, Oklahoma, where he studied field artillery, and so on some of his army pictures, it has on his lapels the crossed cannons that are the insignia for the field artillery. Well, I thought I would talk a little bit about my father's mission, where he was called to serve in the German Swiss mission. And so he went to Germany, and his mission was from 1936 to 1939, which was a very interesting time to be in Germany. Adolf Hitler was coming to power at that time, and the war actually broke out in Europe in 1937. But the tensions were building between the Nazi Germany and the United States. Many things happened, but in his early mission, he was in a town in Germany, and they had a propaganda train that came into town, and and they did this. They sent these around to all the towns to kind of get the people indoctrinated into what the government's ideas were and what they should be thinking and believing in. And he said that there were several cars, kind of like, or trailers, kind of in a circle, and you would enter at one end, and there would be pictures. And I don't know if there were movies or different kinds of visual displays, and in each car. And he said when you came out the far end, you had two concepts deeply ingrained. One of them is that the Jews were the reason for all of the country's trouble. Now, Germany had been in a deep depression since the armistice at the end of World War I, and it was very harsh. And so the German people were really impoverished by all of the harsh measures. My father said that he would see poor people going through the garbage cans of the rich people looking for scraps, and the rich people would peel their potatoes, and their potato skins they'd throw out. So the poor people would gather up these things and they would cook them up or whatever they did, and that's where all the nutrients are, is on the skins. And said so they were able to stay healthy and strong, and but those are the conditions that they were there. So it was right for someone to come along like Adolf Hitler and propose ideas that would glorify the German people and make them feel indignant that they had to endure these things. And so this propaganda train got the people to believe that the Jews were the blame for everything that's going bad in the country. And the other thing was that the Russians were their mortal enemies. And so it kind of got the people ready for war and, the annihilation of the Jews. And so at some point during this period of time, they had a mission conference, and they took this picture of all the missionaries standing on the courthouse steps in the town square. And for the picture, there was a picture of the Nazi flag and the American flag on both sides of this congregation. And they snapped the picture, and the guy jerked down that American flag so fast. I mean, it was like they didn't want that to be seen anywhere. So they took a quick picture and then took the flag down. But when the war broke out, when the Germans invaded the Netherlands and started the war in Europe, the church withdrew the missionaries out of Germany. And so he spent the rest of his mission in Switzerland, where they spoke German. He spoke beautiful German to where he sounded like a native, and had many experiences there, learned how to ski and do some things in Switzerland. And after his mission, instead of returning home here, he went to Italy to study voice. And so he spent some time there. And there's a picture that I had that shows him in an Italian military uniform with a helmet and everything. It looks very different than ours, but I'm sure he tried somebody else's uniform on, but it was kind of funny to see that. And he took a picture of it, but like one of Mussolini's troops. So my father returned from his mission, and for a time he would make money by hitchhiking to Detroit, and he would buy a used car there because you could get them cheaper. And he would travel with his money in a money belt, wrapped around his waist underneath his clothing. And so he carried this money, and he'd go there and he'd buy a car, two of them, I believe, and he would tow bar them out west. And then he'd come home and he would detail them up and clean them. And I remember him telling me one time that he spent so much time cleaning up this car to make it look beautiful. And during the war years, cars were hard to come by. The U.S. automotive industry was was all focused on building tanks and airplanes and munitions, and so they did not. During the war years, there were no 42, 43, 44 Fords, Buicks, or any of those kinds of cars. So used cars were in quite high demand, and he spent all this time fixing up this car, and the guy didn't even look at it. He just came, paid the money, and took the car. And he'd spent all of that time, and he's like, "Hey, look, I did all this stuff," you know. The guy didn't care. He was happy with anything. So, but he did that quite a bit, and so he was a car guy early in life, and so that got him ready to, after the war, he got into the car business. And but these were the years that he was going to the University of Utah during year, and he started his military career after that. And after his training in Fort Sill, at some point, he got his orders to go to London. And so he never saw combat because of his knowledge of German language. He was put into military intelligence, and so he spent the war in London during the Battle of Britain, and that was interesting. He would hear the Germans were sending what they called buzz bombs overhead. These were unguided missiles that they would point them in the general direction of London. Over on the France side, they had already occupied France, and they put enough fuel in these things, and they were a flying bomb, is what they were, and they put enough gas to get them over London, and you'd hear them overhead, and they would make this buzzing noise, and as long as you could hear that engine running, you knew that you were safe. But as soon as they would stop running, then you'd have to run for cover because you didn't know where this thing was going to land, and so they would take refuge in the underground or the subway. They call it the underground in London, and so he spent plenty of time down there, while the bombs were falling, and a lot of destruction and fires were going on. And there was one time that he was, I guess they were leaving the underground, and he's walking out, and back then there was a lot of military personnel everywhere, and he's walking toward the stairs, and someone calls out, "Captain Hickman!" And so both him and the officer next to him turn around and say, "Yes," and then they look at each other, and they found out that they were cousins. They were both captains, both in the Army, and both the same name. So anyway, that was an interesting experience. But he saw a lot of the destruction of London, and he stayed the war there. Thankfully, he was spared, being in action. But after the war was over, then the U.S. Army sent him over to Germany to confiscate Hitler's training films and he made a training film for the U.S. government about Hitler's army, how he motivated and mobilized the population there, and starting with the Hitler Youth, the equivalent to the Boy Scouts, and trained them in aircraft design and all of the different things that they would be able to use in warfare. Because at the final end of the war, even the youth were mobilized and put into service because there was no more, the armies were full of old men and young boys. So anyway, he made this film, and we have a copy of it. And it's funny because at the beginning of it, it says top secret, which it's not anymore, but at the time it was a big deal. And so his last place to work was the Signal Corps Photographic Center, his last duty station in Long Island City, New York. And that's where he got out of the service, and that's how our family ended up in New York City. Getting out of the service, he and my mother both were involved in going to school. They went to Manhattan Ward, and he got into the car business. And to tell you a little bit about my parents, I feel very blessed that I was given such wonderful parents. They were both very talented and intelligent and strong in the church and in their values that they imparted to us as children. And as I said, my mother was a very talented pianist, and she lived through hard times in her life. Her mother passed away when she was 10 years old, and at Christmas time of all times. I think she died on the 22nd or 23rd of December in 1930. Just before they were a young married couple, and they went out on the town a week before, and it was, she caught a cold, and back then it was before penicillin, just before penicillin that would have saved her life, and she was dead within a week. And so my mother missed out on a lot of experiences of having a mother to teach and train her some vital things. And she had to take over the responsibility in her family of being the mother of two younger sisters. Back in those days, there was a high infant mortality rate. She had two younger brothers that died in infancy, and one was named Richard and one was named Frederick, so that's how I got my name. And so she learned to be strong at a very young age. And unfortunately, my grandfather was heartbroken by the loss of his wife. They were very much in love, and he became an alcoholic, and that ended up taking his life many years later. But she had the tough experience of growing up with an alcoholic father and no mother, and she was a warrior to triumph over those kinds of circumstances. But she had an aunt that paid for her education and encouraged her, and her mother was a pianist and had a beautiful piano in the house, and she learned how to play the piano and became very proficient. She had rare skills. Oftentimes people would come, she'd play in church all through her life. She loved giving service to the church wherever she could. She was ward organist, stake organist. She would play in the temples, and in later years even the Joseph Smith building. She played in the Salt Lake Temple as well. And she would play prelude music, and it was beautiful and heavenly, and people would come up to her and ask her what she was playing, and she said, "I don't know, I was just kind of making it up as I go," which she had a gift for that. It's too bad that some of her music wasn't written down, because it was truly amazing. But she loved giving of her talents to the Lord. And I remember her telling me that she felt like that the Lord had his finger on her all through her life, blessed her in many ways, even though she had some great losses early on. And when my parents met, they were very much in love. My mother loved my father very, very much. I remember her telling me that she showered him with affection for all through their early years. And for some reason, they couldn't have children. For 7 years they were married. And, they went to see doctors and specialists to see what was wrong. And they never could really figure it out. About the time they gave up on the idea, boom, she got pregnant. And along came Gay, and then Randy after that. And and then I came along, and then Scott was the last of the litter. But we were all born and raised in New York City because of things getting started there after the war. Now, my father and my mother had quite a sparkly personality. She had an amazing sense of humor and loved a good joke. And she was kind of like different than my father. My father was very prim and proper. And my mother, you know, if there was some off-color joke that she heard that was funny, she would still, you know, get a kick out of it. And my father was, if he heard anything like that, he would say, "I think that's just terrible." So they were very different, but I kind of took after my mom, I have to say. But I got a lot of wonderful qualities from my father. My father was just the most amazing gentleman, genteel, well-mannered, cultured, and I mean, if he hadn't have run into some troubles later in life, he was definitely general authority material. He was just an amazing man with wonderful qualities. And he got into the car business, and that kind of dominated the rest of his life. In fact, he died suddenly of a heart attack at my age while he was at work. And so we always talked about moving back to Utah, but it never happened. It was kind of like the Jews say, "Well, next year in the in the Holy Land," or whatever. But we never made it back to Utah, at least as a family. He never made it out here. He always lived in New York. But he was known and had a reputation among all of the people that he did business with as the only man anybody knew that did not drink, smoke, swear, or, you know, bear false witness. He was just known as being an unusual man of great integrity. And so
How old was he when he died?
he was 68, precisely my age. It's kind of a thing in our family that men die at 68. My father died of a heart attack at 68. My grandfather, Frank Leslie, died of a heart attack at 68. My great-grandfather, George Washington Hickman, died of a heart attack at 68. And so it's kind of Randy's made it past that, thankfully, and now it's my turn to run the gauntlet. And so hopefully I'll make it through there too, but it's kind of an interesting pattern. But, you know, you think about each generation is, you know, diluted by, you know, half of one side and half of the other. My mother lived till she was 88. And so hopefully that curse or whatever it is will not follow this generation. So I felt really blessed to grow up in such a wonderful and diverse place as New York City. I didn't realize it until I went to school at BYU, and none of my roommates had really gone anywhere or been very far from home. A lot of them from Utah, and I would used to, you know, put on Saturday Night Live back in the day, and I was just, you know, I was hysterical with it. It was such good humor, but nobody else really got half of the jokes because they were like, it was kind of a New York thing. So anyway, but growing up in New York, there were so many things that I was just normally exposed to that were unusual. And I think about how protective we are with our children these days. And I basically left the house in the morning, and my parents didn't see me or my mom. My dad was at work till late, and I was like out roaming the neighborhood, doing whatever I wanted to. And, you know, I got into some sketchy situations, but, you know, things that I would never let my children do, you know. So there was lots of experiences. I remember that I would ride the bus to go to primary by myself, and it was, you know, several miles to go to Queens Ward where we attended. And so I went there, and I had 25 cents in my pocket. You know, I just had a quarter, and that was my fare home. And so I went to primary and was done, and I walked down to Northern Boulevard to catch the I think it was the Q12 or something. It was the the bus that ran back toward my house. And I was standing there, had nothing to do. I had to wait for the bus. And so I thought, I'll give Mom a call. And so I put this quarter in the phone, and I thought it gave change. But when I hung up, nothing came out. And so if you used a quarter, you didn't get anything back. But the call was only 10 cents. And so I had no money to take the bus. So here it was evening. And so I just had to walk all the rest of the way home. I didn't get home till after dark, and those days there were no cell phones or anything like that. So, and I walked through some sketchy places. I walked along the railroad tracks and different ways that I knew to get home, and so it took me a while, but I made it there. But I think
How
about
old were you?
well, I was in primary, so I was like 10 years old or something, and anyway, it was.
I can't believe you knew your way home.
Well, yeah. I've always had a really good sense of direction. It's just like, a homing pigeon type of thing. Anyway, so I've survived a lot of interesting things. I remember this was a few years later. We lived out on Long Island, and we weren't far from the ocean, and there were several inlets. And we knew some people there in the ward, the Werners, and they had a house on one of these inlets where you could have a boat and launch it, and you'd go down the canal and out into the bay. And Randy and I had this little hydroplane. It was homemade. Our bishop's son had built the thing, and we bought it from him, and it was kind of leaky and everything, but we had a little Johnson Seahorse 5 horsepower engine that we'd mount on the back of the thing, and that would zip. It would come up out of the water and just zip across. It would plane, and it was just fun to go out there and just race around out in the bay with this thing. And it's kind of interesting because we had an Airstream trailer, which was, it's kind of like nowadays. I didn't realize how cool they are, but they're very, very expensive. They're like the most expensive kind of trailer you can get. But that company was founded by a guy named Wally Byam, and part of their logo shows him pulling a trailer with a bicycle. And so Randy thought, that's cool. We could make a trailer with this boat on it, and I could ride it. And so, we had this idea. And my father had a shop with welding equipment and all the different things. And so there were many times that we went down there and we had an idea that we wanted to make anything. We did belly boards too one time because Randy came back from California. And so we made these belly boards that were completely made out of the wrong material. They're heavy. They wouldn't hardly float. But we had them all painted up with racing stripes on them. And it took us one time going out in the ocean with them, we realized these don't work. So after making a huge project, but anyway, so we built this trailer, had it welded it all up, had a little hitch. It came to that we made a bicycle hitch also, and so you can imagine all of the time and effort that was spent in doing this, and it fit this boat perfectly. And so we were going to take the boat to the water, which is only, I don't know, 5 or 6 miles away. So we hitched it up and we started riding. And Randy was the one that was doing this. He was older. And it took so much effort for him to pull that thing. He got about 5 blocks and realized this is never going to work. So we had to scrap that idea. But at some point we did get the boat down to the water, and we just left it there at the Werner's house. And so I took this boat out into the bay. One of these days, I'm off by myself, miles away, in sketchy conditions. Nobody knew anything about where I was. I mean, my body would have had to wash up on the shore someplace before they'd ever figure it out. But I went out there just skipping across the water, and there was this big cabin cruiser that cut across my path, and it had a huge wake. I mean, we're talking 6 feet. And so I went across this wake, and this little hydroplane, I'd go up one side, catch air, boom, I'd come down. Up the next one, boom, I'd come down. And about the third time, the engine came off the back And it was one of those kind that you're holding on to it with the control. And luckily, I had a good hold of it because it went down into the water, and I had to pull it up, or I'd lost it completely. I pulled it up, got it back on there, but it had sucked water up into the carburetor, and there was no starting this thing. And here I am out in the middle of this bay in a leaking boat, and what seemed like miles from shore. I wasn't, but it was a sketchy and kind of a dangerous situation. And I had one paddle and I had one can to bail with, and so I had to alternate bailing and paddling and so forth. And I made it back. And so anyway, that's just another one of those stories that I think about. I think, wow, I can't believe that I had such freedom to do stuff, and nobody knows what I was into.
That's interesting. That did your mom keep very good track of you?
Well, my mother was very busy. She taught school during the day, and she taught music lessons, and then she had her house responsibilities. When my parents were separated, we lived farther out. My dad lived in the city, and he had an apartment in there close to his work, and they were actually they were divorced for 2 years before I even realized it, because I was kind of naive, and I thought, well, it was just convenience. He would come and take us out to the movies every weekend. We would either go to the movies or bowling, but it was usually the movies. And there was a period of time there during the 60s where you cannot mention a movie that I have not seen, because we went to everything. And I remember my father would bring my mother flowers on special occasions, and there was this particular flower. It was a branch of these shiny elliptic leaves that she loved that, and I don't to this day know what they were, but I noticed that I see them growing in the South when I go to Florida and stuff, and so he knew even after they were separated things that she liked, and brought her things like that, which I thought was really sweet. But yeah, we lived in Massapequa, and that was when I was in junior high school and just beginning high school. And back then, believe it or not, schools had rifle teams, and I tried out for the rifle team, and because I was fascinated at this point with guns and shooting, and which is something that my father was never very interested in, but during this time when I didn't see much of him when I would go to church, I had a couple of different mentors that were Sunday school teachers and people that I taught that I gravitated towards, and they taught me some things that I wouldn't have learned otherwise. But I had an interest in flying aircraft and guns. I went to try out for this, and there was like 400 kids. Everybody wanted to join the rifle team, and so there were tryouts, and there were. So we went in there, shot several times, and they would eliminate down to where there was like 5 people. I was one of the 5, and the coach there he was kind of a gruff sort of a guy, and I remember we were all sitting in the hall outside of the rifle range, which they had a rifle range in the basement of the school, which is, I think about it now, it's like unthinkable, a place like New York City, and he was saying, "Oh, you're this and you're that," and he got to me and he said, "And I don't even know why you're here." And he said, "Maybe I just like the way you look." so, so anyway, I guess I got by on my looks, but I did get on the rifle team, and I lettered in rifling, as well as orchestra. My mother, she was not only musically talented, but she was a good businesswoman, and she started music schools in New York City. She bought one from some people, actually church members, that had this place, and they weren't going to do anything, so they said, "Take it over if you want it." And so she went in there and hired some musicians to teach music and promoted the place, and it got to be a successful business to the point that she opened up different schools in Brooklyn and other parts of the metropolitan area. I know that she had one in Canarsie and Bay Ridge, and anyway, it was interesting. And I started to study violin. She had a very talented elderly violin teacher that was there, and I was kind of like his protege. He took a special interest in me. I don't know why, but we had a very special relationship, and I've had many experiences with him. But through that, I played in the orchestra starting in grade school and junior high and high school, and so I had the opportunity of performing in several orchestras, and I was kind of like the little, I don't know, long-haired musician, but I never had long hair. But I loved classical music, and my brothers and sisters would always like to hear rock and roll, and I was just totally not into that. It was kind of annoying. They'd like to play loud contemporary music, and I was kind of the little snob that was into the classics, you know.
That's awesome, Rick. I just have to say. You're related to my dad.
You're going to have to cut this part out, but I remember one time we were in the car, and we were all waiting in the car for my mother to come, and she gets into the car, and music is blasting. Of course, I'm disapproving of it, and my mother gets in there, and she says, "Shut those screaming niggers off." Which back in the day, I mean, that wasn't all that. Now it's like the worst word you could ever say, but back in those days, it was just there was nothing really derogatory. It was just like who they were, and so.
Do you still like classical music? I'm just curious.
Oh yes, absolutely.
So do you like going to the orchestra?
The symphony?
Yeah, the symphony.
Absolutely. Yeah, I've always had a real appreciation for the classics and Tchaikovsky and Mozart and all of those people. In fact, my mother actually met Rachmaninoff. She went to a performance here back, I guess it would have been in the 30s, but she was a young woman, and she went to a concert, heard him play, and she went back and she got to shake his hand. And she went home, and she put her hand on a piece of paper and drew an outline and on this piece of paper. This hand shook the hand of Rachmaninoff, and she said, "I'm never going to wash my hand again." So, anyway, she obviously did, but.
So do you still play the violin?
I have not. I regrettably, when I got to BYU, my first schedule, I was supposed to be in the symphony orchestra there, and I just thought, I'm just not good enough at this to ever make a living at it, and I need to focus on, what I can do to support a family. And so I kind of, my violin career kind of faded away at that point. I didn't do much. My mother and I still performed in sacrament meetings from time to time, and we would take it out and play it. But I haven't touched the violin for years. I still have 5 of them, but I haven't done that. And if I ever get to a point where I can have a little bit of freedom in life, maybe I'll resume it. But it's inspirational to know that your dad, Uncle Vard, he was quite a violinist and studied all of his life till his older years.
He actually was self-taught.
Really?
He took a few lessons, but he received a violin. His dad somehow owned a violin, and he had lent it out to someone or rented it out or something, and it came back to him when he was about 12. I mean, it came back home, and he asked his mom and dad if he could play it. And I think he just took in school, and then he just came home from his mission. He taught himself until he was married and had the money to actually take lessons. And he took lessons on and off a little bit when he was, raising us kids. But the thing with my dad is he just played his violin every day, every single
That's
day.
awesome. That is totally awesome. That's the thing is I was, practicing was something I just never really liked to do. I always wanted to be out playing and doing different things, and so that was, if I were diligent, I would have been better. But there was several handicaps. I had near, I had relative pitch, I guess is what they call it. But I had always had a sharp ear. I could, I could tell if something was slightly off, it would bother me. Even the piano and different things like that. And so I had some talents there, but I have dyslexia, and that also translated into my music. I was not good at sight reading music at all. If I heard something, I could play it, but if I had to look at it and try to make it, it would take me a while to hammer it out. And there was one time when I went into competition in my school. I was chosen to represent the school, and so I had to do different things. And one of the things I had to do was sight read, and I just really butchered that. But the piece that I had worked on, I did really well. In fact, in the orchestra that had quite a talented Jewish girl that was the first violinist, and I was practicing in this school in the bathroom before I went in to perform, and they could hear me. And she said, "Was that you?" And I said, "Yeah, that was me." And she says, "Wow." I said, "That was very nice." And so I could do something if I worked on it, but I wasn't the best. Sight reading's an important thing, and my mother, you put a piece of music in front of her, and boom, it was like, she could play it like she'd played it all of her life, and I was never that way. But yeah, dyslexia has affected my life in a lot of ways. I mean, I wanted to go into medicine, and I found out my first semester, with a 5-hour chemistry class, it's like, oh my gosh, this is this is not going to happen. I need to reevaluate my goals. Now there's things they can do for dyslexia, but back then it was like it was a showstopper for me, and so I had to, there's no way I could read a book a night. I mean, in my entire life, outside of the standard works, which I have read several times, because now I know what's written in there. I almost know what it's going to say, and so, but books that I've actually read, I could probably count on one hand. But like blind people who are given their other senses are kind of they can compensate. They have sense of a blind person can hear things very, very clearly, or and feel and touch things and so forth. I was given some gifts that kind of compensated for my ability to read. I absorb information and retain it from many, many other sources. And I mean, it's not like I can't read. I remember one time when I was in junior high school, you know, um, my teacher had me, he realized I had a reading problem, and he said, "Well, read this paragraph." And it was on the page of a history book, and so I read the paragraph, and then he said, "Now close your book and tell me what you read." And I repeated it back to him almost word for word, and he said, "Well, I guess you don't have a comprehension problem." So,
That's
and I remember what that paragraph was about too, because the other thing that I have is I have a pretty unusual capacity for remembering things in great detail that even happened 60 years or more ago. And like that particular thing, I remember what that paragraph was about the Mexican War and President Polk, and it was just obscure things. It's like my mind is the Library of Congress of useless information, and so I remember all kinds of stupid stuff that will never matter to anybody. But I can remember things, but then I don't know what I did with my keys 5 minutes ago. Well, I'm reminded right now of Randy. My parents were separated for a time when during my high school years, And Randy lived with my father. It was in the divorce agreement that my father would have custody of us when we were in our high school years. There was a period of time when the New York City schools went on strike. That happened quite a bit. And Randy wanted to be able to graduate on time. And so he came out and transferred out, and he stayed with us for a while. And we had a great time. Randy could drive, and so he would take us and some other kids in the area, and we would drive into Plainview Ward, which was out in Plainview, Long Island, and we would go to early morning seminary. And so I have many memories of us all piling in the car and going there in the dark every morning, and it was nice to have Randy with us. And so, but Randy and I had some shenanigans going on sometimes where my mother had a business where she would teach music, and she got tired of signing her name on checks, and so she had a signature stamp made that had her name on it, and she would just stamp the back of checks to endorse them, to deposit them and stuff. And so we got the idea that we could make notes, to excuse us from school, excuse our absence. And so we would just write a note and boom, stamp her name on it, and it worked flawlessly. And so there were times when Randy and I would cut school, and we would go drive into Manhattan, and there was like this big hobby shop there that was like 5 floors of nothing but everything from model trains to airplanes and just every kind of a hobby on different floors. And so that was our vice. We would cut school and go in there and spend the day doing Manhattan, and which was quite a ways from where we lived, but my mother never knew. And the school never knew. So, if you're going to get away with something, you have to figure out how to do it right. And so, anyway, this happened a couple of years later. Randy was already graduated and had been to Rick's his first year, and we had motorcycles, and we were living in California at this time. And I remember cutting school with him, and we went up in the mountains. He had a Honda 350, and I had a Suzuki 150, and and so we went out just cruising around doing different things. And then when we were coming back home, we were driving through the subdivision, and I wasn't particularly paying attention. He was ahead, and I was just sort of following him, but something was up, and the road ahead was blocked, and I'm just kind of looking left and right and just scooting along. I don't know how fast I was going, but all of a sudden I see Randy ahead of me, and he had turned half turned and was dead in front of me, blocking my path, and it was too late for me to do anything. So I just locked up the brakes, and I just remember him looking at me, and boom, I hit him with my bike, and I was thrown off mine, and anyway, I was knocked unconscious and laying there in the road, and he was scared to death. He came up to me, and my hand was gripping the handlebars still, and he tried to pull my hand off, and anyway, my eyes were cockeyed. I was looking like this, but anyway, they got the ambulance and hauled me to the hospital, and I'd broken my collarbone and had a concussion, and I just remember waking up in the emergency room, and my first vision was a policeman standing over my head, and I could see his highway patrol badge and everything, and he says to me, "How fast were you going?" And I said, 25 miles an hour. So, which is probably not the truth, but I didn't want to get a ticket. So, but I had lost my memory of what we had done. It came back later, but my mother was called down there, and she was scared to death of what had happened, and there was an accident, and you always think the worst. But so anyway, Randy and I, we were close enough in age that we kind of got into some trouble every now and then. But I don't regret any of it. We had a great time together. Randy's Randy's just been an amazing brother, and as a man, he's truthfully one of the finest men I've ever known, and I'll always be thankful. There was a time when my mother told me the story when she was pregnant with him. They were attending Manhattan Ward, and President David O. McKay came back and to speak. And after church, he asked if all of the pregnant women would meet him in the bishop's office, which I've never heard of anything like that. But so she went there, and he wanted to give them blessings. So she gave my mother. He gave my mother a blessing, and then he remarked to her after. He says, "You're carrying a very special child," and that was prophetic because Randy's amazing. So I always remember that story. And thought, what a blessing to have something like that into the hand of a prophet. Randy, I've just had numerous experiences with him in my life, and he has set such a good example. I would flatter myself to say I'm half the man he is, but he's raised a wonderful family, done everything by the book, early morning scripture study, whether he's by himself or with his family. He's just been exemplar in all of his actions, his business ethics, and just as wonderful as I could ever imagine. And I attribute a lot of that because he was raised by my father, and I think that was a very valuable time for him. That he was in his formative, adult, years, and he had my father's guiding hand with him. Plus, he's just a very special spirit. I've just seen numerous things, and I know in his later life, his partner and he built a spec home up in Park City for the Olympics, and it was they invested quite a bit of money. This was a high-end, upscale. I mean, heated walks and driveways so that you wouldn't have to shovel them, and it was like 4 floors, had a cinema, and they all furnished with beautiful, expensive things. And they expected that after Park City, that after the 2002 Olympics, Salt Lake's going to be on the map. This is going to be a great investment. Someone's going to buy it. Well, it never sold for the $5 million that they thought, and they lowered the price and different things. And anyway, long story short, him and his partners ended up losing a lot of money. I mean, over 100,000, maybe 200. I don't know, but he stood good for that. He could have declared bankruptcy, but he stuck it out and he paid it off. And not too many people would do that. And so this is one of many examples. And he's been richly blessed for doing everything the right way, and so. But he's just always been just a very special person. I remember that I went to BYU after high school, and he was on his mission in Kentucky, and he didn't have good enough grades to get accepted at BYU, and so he had to go to Rick's, and I wanted to spend that last time. I knew it would probably be the last time we'd ever spend together, so I kind of lowered my standards and I went to Rick's after going to BYU, which is really not the way most people do it. They, everybody at Rick's wants to go to BYU, so it was really kind of a novelty. I was like the big man on campus because I'd actually been to BYU, and so. But Randy and I spent that semester together, and were roommates, and that was a wonderful experience. And I had one particular really spiritual experience while I was there. I was struggling on, if I wanted to get the Melchizedek priesthood at that time. I knew I wanted to go on a mission, but I thought maybe I don't want that responsibility right away, and so I was wavering on that. And one night I had this vivid dream, and I don't have dreams that make any sense usually, but I was asleep, but yet I was dreaming that I was in the room I was asleep in, and it was kind of almost like Joseph Smith had the experience of the powers of darkness, kind of smothering him, or and I felt that, and I realized I didn't have any power to do anything about it, and it scared the heck out of me. I woke up in the middle of the night in a real panic, and I woke him up and asked him to pray with me, and so we did. And anyway, it was a very emotional experience. He started praying, and I just started bawling, but I knew that it was time, and so that changed my mind about some things, and so I've remembered that ever since. It was he probably didn't know what in the heck I'm waking him up for in the middle of the night, but he was always there for me.
You said you changed your course. Did you decide to go on a mission?
Yes, yes, I that was kind of a turning point, and right after that, I asked to have the priesthood, and in fact, I think Randy ordained me, and I started putting my papers in and making plans to go on a mission, and it took me a little bit of doing, because I had misbehaved enough that I had to have a general authority interview me, which Hartman Rector Jr. Was coming through, and they arranged for me to see him. And he's another amazing man. I really enjoyed visiting with him. But anyway, got ready, and of all the places that I thought that I would go, I'd studied German in high school. I did well with that. My father had gone there. My heritage was, German. I look German, and in fact, my German teacher in high school, I think she was hitting on me, but she said, "You look just like the boyfriends I used to go out with when I was in Germany." And so I thought, okay, not sure how to respond to that, but anyway, I thought I was going to go to Germany. I wanted to go to South America because I had roommates at BYU that were there, and they would chatter in Spanish and stuff, and I thought that sounds cool. And so I was kind of thinking that was what was going to happen. When I opened my mission call, and it said that I was called to the Japan mission, that was totally blindside for me. But yet, another very emotional experience. I had to witness that was where the Lord wanted me to go. And it was one of the most joyous experiences of my life, which sounds cliche, but to this point, I haven't had that many great rewarding experiences, except maybe having my children, which that was wonderful. But going to Japan was a wonderful thing, and I don't remember being homesick one day, just to be in a foreign land. And it did actually say in my patriarchal blessing, I believe, that I would teach the gospel in foreign lands and enjoy the experience of taking people into the waters of baptism and stuff. And so that was fulfilled there. And it was, my scholastic career was really limited because of my reading. And they gave us like a stack of books when we went to, I went to Hawaii to what was called then the Asian Pacific Language Training Mission. That was before the MTC. And so I had the fun experience of enjoying a beautiful place like Hawaii for a couple of months. and learning Japanese. And back then it was just all memorization. Like I could speak Japanese for, an hour and not really know what I was saying just because I had memorized the first couple of discussions, which they try to get you to do. But I had all these books and I never cracked them. I found that because of my unique abilities, I was I was able to learn better by speaking and listening, and I learned the language better than 90% of the elders that were there. Just naturally, I never opened Martin's grammar or the verb chart or all the different things. I did have a little dictionary that I would, look a bunch of stuff up, and I was trying to also learn their characters, and so I would see characters while I was out walking around, and I would write them in pen on my hand. By the end of the day, my hand was just covered with ink, and I had members that I would go and ask, "What is this? What is that?" And and teach me how to write this stuff properly, and because there are many strokes in a Chinese character, which is part of the Japanese language, is they use the Chinese characters, and some of these have like 20, 25 strokes, and you can't just make them look right. You got to make each stroke in the right order for it to be right, and so it's a fascinating thing. Nobody masters Japanese. I got quite good at it, and within 6 months I could kind of say what I wanted to say, but for the first few months you're just kind of like dependent on your companion. I remember going to my first branch. It was kind of an interesting thing, but he said, "Well, my first companion, he forced me to do this and that." He says, "I'm not going to do that." I said, "You just kind of watch what I do." And his name was Richard McCarroll, and he was from the San Juan Valley in Colorado. But we became good friends, and he just led the way, and we were doing door to door, house to house. Never got in anywhere. All day long. Finally, in the afternoon, he said, "Well, what do you think? Or you want to give it a try?" And so I'm thinking, no, not really, but I said, "Yeah, okay, I'll do it." So I knock on the door, and the young man comes to the door, and I start talking to him, and my companion's really not paying too close of attention. But all of a sudden, we're going in, and he's like, "What?" So we went in, and we taught this young man, and took a few months, but that was my first baptism, my first door contact. I mean, you think about the odds of that. Well, it was pretty phenomenal. But anyway,
That's remarkable.
yeah, in a place like Japan. Japan was not a high baptizing mission, especially back then. There were elders, and these were a big mission that had like 225 elders. That's a lot. And so he there were elders that never even saw a baptism that would come and go, and some that might have one or two. I was privileged to participate in I think 8, but I was just kind of a lovable sort of guy that was not this porcelain strict missionary. If people loved me, I kind of believed you just love people into the gospel, and you know, you don't try to be this. It was just my way. There were others that were different, and I'm sure they were very successful. But I enjoyed my mission. I thoroughly did, and I didn't let the rules get in my way of having a good time. Not that I was really bad or anything, but I thought, man, you're here in a foreign land. When are you ever going to be here again? And so I'm going to enjoy this time. So I was in a very strict mission that had rules for pretty much everything, and then some. And then I had a lot of neat experiences there. One of them was during the course of my mission, I got sick, and I had a lung ailment, and I went to several doctors, and they gave me medicines, and then I went to the Seventh-day Adventists had a hospital there, we went down there, and the doctor there said, well, you really need to stay in at night. He says, I know it's hard to fulfill your mission by doing that, but you need to stay out of the damp air in Tokyo. And so I went for a time where we'd have to go on splits, and all of our teaching would be in the evening, so I didn't get to go on those. I'd stay in the branch with a member, and my companion would go on a split and go and do the teaching and stuff. And so that went on for a while, and eventually they transferred me into the mission home, where I worked there for a while. And the cool thing about that was the Tokyo mission home, which is now where the Tokyo Temple stands. They tore it down to build that, but it was a big complex, and I had some really interesting and fun experiences there. But every time a general authority would come to Asia, they'd all stop. They'd fly into Tokyo, and then they'd fly to China or wherever it was they were going. But I had the opportunity to meet several general authorities while I was there, including Gordon B. Hinckley and Howard W. Hunter, and Elder L. Tom Perry came there. I remember sitting at the breakfast table with Elder Hunter, and he was peeling a banana, and he remarked, "What an amazing piece of engineering a banana is, because you open it up and it's all perfectly clean inside," and and so it was just fun to be able to rub elbows with such prominent people, apostles and prophets. But when L. Tom Perry was there, and he was a new apostle at the time, my mission president said, "Why don't you go and ask him if he can administer to you?" And so I did, and so we went into the mission president's office. My mission president anointed me, and Apostle Perry laid his hands on my head and gave me a powerful blessing, and told me that I wasn't sent into the mission field to be among the ranks of the sick, but to be healthy and strong, and that from the moment I get off my chair, I'll feel the clearing in my lungs, and that I won't be afflicted with it anymore. And he did, it healed me. And so to this day, I've never had that problem again. But anyway, it was a great thing to be administered to by an apostle. And I ran into him again. He came to my ward a few years ago, and I went up to him and said, "You're not going to remember me," but I told him, and he said, "Oh yeah, that's great." And anyway, he's no longer with us, but they had already started the process of transferring me to a better place, and I was worried that they were going to send me to Arizona, because that's usually what happened. But I was like pleading with them, "Don't let me leave Japan," and so I had the unique experience of getting transferred to Okinawa from Tokyo, which is like 3 missions over. And so Okinawa is kind of like the Japanese Hawaii. They still had the air conditioning running in December, and so I went down there, and it was a completely different experience. I mean, I had mentioned that the Japan mission was very strict, had rules for everything, but the Japan Okinawa, or Japan West mission is what it was called at the time, they were very light on rules. And so it was quite it was almost, it wouldn't shake your testimony, but it was like quite a contrast to see how different mission presidents run their missions. It's kind of like a monarchy, and so I had a great time in West Japan, and I feel really blessed, because there's no other missionary since the early days when Japan was one mission that got to see so much of Japan and different cultures, which Okinawa is kind of a different culture than regular Japan. I'm going to tell a story. I've traveled across the country many times, and I still do. But it started at a very young age. My mother remarried and we moved to California. So I got to spend time in Newport Beach and then ultimately Santa Barbara before I went to BYU. But during the summertime, I would travel back to New York and work with my dad in the city, and I always enjoyed that. New York was always kind of a fun place to go, and I would go on dates back there. And my father had had a lot of connections, and he worked on the cars of a guy that supplied all of the condiments, or not condiments, but the snacks and stuff for the snack bars in these theaters, and therefore he could get tickets to anything. And we just have to call him and say, I need 2 tickets to whatever, and he would have them waiting at the box office. So it was actually a cheap date for me to take a girl into Manhattan and go to a Broadway play. And so I went to many, many plays and enjoyed going to the theaters like that. But there was quite a bit that went on there. But what I would do in preparation for my mission was I would have a project car that I would buy and fix up, and then I would sell it. I would take it out west to school, and then I would sell it in the spring and come back with money and kind of upgrade. My first car was a '67 Mustang convertible, and I drove that across the country. Now my father wanted to go part of the way with me, so he drove with me to Chicago, and then I took him to the airport. Which, I mean, just getting in and out of Chicago, I don't know how I did that, but those days you didn't have GPS. All you had was maps and road signs, but I always had a really good sense of direction, and so it wasn't a problem for me. I dropped him off, and he flew back to New York, and I drove across the rest of the country by myself, and had some interesting experiences. And I was 16 years old, so I would never let my 16-year-old kids do something like that. And here again, my parents were quite lenient, and I think they just trusted and believed in me, and so I wasn't restricted in that way. But I remember I was driving across Iowa, and there was a family in a station wagon that had Utah plates, and so I was excited to see Utah plates, and obviously I don't know, probably a Mormon family, and so I had a notebook with me, and so I would write something and I'd hold it up, a note. And I think I said BYU, I put on it, and I held it up as they went by, and then they'd be all excited, and so then they'd come up and they'd write something, and it was just simple notes like, Provo, Utah, or whatever. And this happened several times, and finally they come by me and they have this note that is like long, and I can't read it, and I'm like. So I roll my window down, and here we're going 70 miles an hour, and I run my car right up against theirs. I mean, I didn't hit them, didn't make contact, but I reached my arm out, and then they roll the window down, and they reach their arm out, and I get close enough to grab this thing, and it was a note saying, we're going to be stopping for dinner up ahead. Would you care to join us? And so I was like, yeah. So anyway, we did, and I got to meet this family, and I remember when I got to Salt Lake and sharing that experience with Grandma. She thought that was amazing. She said, "You need to save this note. This is like a part of history here." And which I don't know whatever became of it, but I do remember the experience. And I think one of the girls in the car was kind of like she liked me, but I continued on and got caught in a blizzard in Wyoming and slid off the road. And here I jump out of this car and I have shorts on and t-shirt, and I'd hit a whiteout and I hit the brakes, and I could feel myself sliding in circles. And anyway, but I was able to get the car back up on the road and make the rest of the trip. So I've always had adventures, and By the time I was 25, I've probably experienced more things than most people do in a lifetime. And I've always kind of had a very eventful life, and I'm thankful for it. I've learned many, many things. And one of the things that I have learned about myself, and it's kind of a gift, is that sometimes I don't do that well in normal life, in normal circumstances. I don't excel in a lot of things. But if there's ever an emergency or something terrible happening and everybody's freaking out and can't think of what to do, I'm perfectly relaxed. I know exactly what to do. And it's like, hey, relax, I got this. And I've dealt with so many things in difficult circumstances that it's my thing. I'm your guy. you know, I've learned most people, they try to think outside the box every now and then. I've lived my entire life outside the box, so it's like, this is my world. So I'm a little hesitant to tell this story because it's not a happy story, but it does have a good ending. But when my when my father, actually this happened about the month I was born, in October of 1953. My father, who had taken a man into his confidence in his business, he had a business, a booming business in New York City, on one of the busiest intersections in Queens, of Queens Boulevard and what used to be Horace Harding Boulevard before they built the Long Island Expressway, which cut through there. But he bought this. It was the World's Fair gas station from I think it was, I don't know. It was like a Art Deco design of a building, and it was a Gulf station. And he named his business Major Gulf because he had gotten out of the Army with the rank of major. And it was a gas station with mechanics bays and all kinds of stuff, and it was a big business. And he had a car lot and two or three gas stations, and he was just going great guns. It was a post-war era, and business was booming. And so there was a young man who was down on his luck and on hard times. He'd been on a mission, but he wasn't a very, churchy kind of a guy. And my father had compassion on him and wanted to give him a job and help him. And the fellow's name was Ace Hume. And anyway, so my father had him working for us, and he entrusted him with large amounts of money to, my father's too busy to run to the bank, so we'd hand Ace, a wad of cash and checks and tell him to go and deposit them. And so the fellow would pocket the cash and deposit the checks, and that went on for a while. I don't know how my father didn't notice it, but he didn't, for whatever reason. And there was another practice my dad was doing, and he told me that he didn't realize that it was illegal, but the bank had loaned money on new cars. Not new cars, but used cars. He had a car lot. They called it frontlining. And back in those days, New York was not a title state. All they had was a little registration that went with a car. There was no room for a lien or anything to be on there, and so you could buy and sell these cars even if they had money owed on them. And what my father did, and he thought was okay, was he would sell a car, and he would take that money and reinvest it in other things and just keep paying on the loans. And he thought, well, the loans are being paid and that. But technically that's embezzling. And that's something, he didn't realize. But this guy knew what he was doing was illegal. And one night, his common law wife, this Ace Hume, he beat her up, and she called my dad and said to him, "Mr. Hickman, you're such a nice man. Ace is robbing you blind." And anyway, she kind of, I guess, when this ace found out that she had told him that, he kind of beat my father to the punch and called the district attorney and ratted my father out, betrayed him on this stuff. And then my dad went in and talked to them about it, and he said, "Yeah, I do this and that," not just innocently, just like, "Yeah, as a matter of fact, yeah, I do this and that," and he got in trouble on that, and it had some pretty severe consequences. He was in the bishopric at the time in Manhattan Ward, and it got blown out of proportion, and there were headlines: Mormon leader embezzles thousands, and it was sensationalized like the news do. And anyway, it created a huge struggle for him. And the bad thing about it is that, all of the people in the church that were members, they would all come to him to buy and fix their cars and all that kind of stuff. And there were several members who ended up having their car taken by the bank. They had to buy the car again after paying for it the first time. It was a huge scandal, and there was a time my father couldn't go to church, and it was just a bad time. I was born about this time, and my mother went through horrible stress and humiliation over it. For years this went on, and I remember her telling me that a social worker called her and was talking to her about the incarcerated and things that she needs to do and so forth, and she didn't know what this word incarcerated meant. But after she hung up and she got to looking it up in the dictionary, she realized they were preparing her for her husband to go to jail. And so that was a reality. And it was only because I know that my father had to hire a big shot criminal attorney in New York, a man by the name of Victor Anfuso, and they had to plunk $10,000 down on his desk as a retainer, and that was a huge amount of money back in those days, in the early '50s. And he defended him, and then my father, having grown up in Yale Ward and knowing so many prominent church leaders, J. Reuben Clark was one of the ones who came to defend him. And J. Reuben Clark made pleadings with the judge to keep my father from going to jail, and said that there isn't a man in 1,000 that would stand up and stand good for these debts. And somehow it was nip and tuck for a while, but my dad didn't have to go to jail. But yet the stress of all of this took its toll on their marriage and the relationship with my mother. And in a weak moment, my mother made the mistake of her life, and she turned to another man, which was something that she regretted the rest of her life. But when our family split up, as a consequence, I lived with my mother, and my mother was, I think she always loved my father, but she was critical of him and how he handled money and things like that. And she had little criticisms that I kind of only heard her side of the story through the years, and therefore I was very supportive of my mother. And anybody that said anything against my mom, I didn't like. And anyway, it was clear into my mission. When my mission was over with, my mother came to meet me in Japan, and we took a long train ride together, and she told me the whole story of what had gone on, and that I never knew. I mean, I was very innocent and naive, and but there were several things that I didn't understand, but I guess I wasn't curious enough to ask. But she came. She felt I was old enough to know what she'd done and what the consequences were, and so I always loved my dad and my mom, but I was kind of my mother's son, and so after my mission, I went back and worked the summer once again in New York. And one evening, after we were closing up the lot, I remember where I was standing and talked to my dad about this. And told him that Mom told me what had happened, and I never knew. And and all of these years, I'd had some critical opinions of him and some things. And I said to him, I said, why didn't you tell me? I mean, I've taken her side all of these years, and if I would have known, then it would have been different. And his answer to me has something it's something I'll never forget. But he said to me, he said, I didn't want to deprive you of the love and respect of your mother. And in that moment, I gained more love and respect for that man than I had my entire life. He was a giant, a better man than me. Because I don't know if I could have done that. I know I couldn't have. But that was the reason why he never would get the satisfaction of, releasing his frustrations and anger by telling his children about what their mother had done. And so he just took the hit and waited until we were old enough to know, and I'm thankful because I I've always had a wonderful relationship with my mother and my father, and if I'd have known all of that, it might not have been quite that way. But my mother and I were extremely close. Uh, I think I was the favorite, but maybe all children feel that way. But because I didn't get married till late in life, I spent a lot of time, more than anybody else, with my mother. I would take her on trips with me, and we just had a lot of amazing, fun adventures together. She remarried. She was not happy in her second marriage, and I know that she regretted all of her life that she'd made that mistake. And I know that the ceiling was never canceled, and it's my deepest hope that they are together and that things are things. I know my father, a very forgiving, loving man, and I have no doubt that they'll be together in the next life. So anyway, but my father was a huge example in so many ways, and just a stalwart. He had the most amazing temperament. I think I inherit, this is one of the things I inherited from him. He's just very mild-mannered, gentleman. I never heard him raise his voice his entire life. And the only time, I think it was one time, I remember he was dealing with a customer, and there was a problem, and he was, he was talking about it, and he authenticated being upset, raised his voice. Oh yeah, those people are terrible, and he was going on like that, kind of like siding with this fellow, and he wanted this guy to know that he was upset, but he really wasn't. He never lost control, never once. I don't ever remember him spanking me, ever. Not to say that he didn't discipline us. I remember that when we were kids, sacrament meeting was in the evening. They had the meeting block. There wasn't the current meeting block. It was, you'd go early for one meeting, then you come back for this, and then you'd go to sacrament meeting was the last one. And so by the end of the day, we were all restless, and we didn't want to go to church. Oh, we have to go. It's so boring. But we went, and I remember that you can't get up and leave while someone's talking. That's rude. So as soon as somebody would change, like I'd get up and I'd want to go to the bathroom or do something. And I was a little kid at the time, but I remember it seemed like his arms were 10 feet long because he would somehow grab me and pull me back. And if I was squawking or anything, if I was bad, he would put his hand over my mouth and he would pinch me. And I would be like, I couldn't make a noise. But that's the worst discipline I ever got from him. But he would give us lectures and let us know how disappointed he was if we did something. And he was known for that. But just a kind, gentle, soft-spoken man. Now, my mother, on the other hand, was kind of a pistol. If you got her upset, you were going to get hurt. And so I won't go into that, but these days, these kids don't know how good they have it, where corporal punishment is something that's kind of like, not accepted anymore. But I think that the current generation is in dire need of some good old-fashioned child abuse. So,
Spanking.
yeah. When my parents were going to Manhattan Ward, there were a lot of prominent people that went there. And one thing I will tell, my mother was in the Relief Society presidency, and they were trying to make a fundraising project about making things to sell. And she had an idea to make a scripture cover for the scriptures. And she worked all night trying to, she was a seamstress. It was one of the talents that she had. My father, when they early started in New York and they didn't have children, my father was a singer, and he actually had a opportunity to sing at the Metropolitan Opera. I think the opera was La Travatoria or something. I might be wrong about that, but I think that was the opera, and he performed at the Metropolitan Opera. So he was an opera singer, and he could have pursued that as a career. But his mother was also a singer, and in talking about it and consulting, he knew that wouldn't be a good lifestyle for a family, to raise a family. So he prioritized his family life. But during this time, my mother got into making costumes. I'm assuming for the Metropolitan Opera as well. But she was a talented seamstress. I remember growing up that she had this maiden form. I don't know what you call those things, that you make dresses and you pin them to them, and it even had a little pedal you would push down on it, and it would expand the chest area so that you made something they could breathe, because they were very form-fitting type things. And she made this costume for a very famous actress and opera singer. Her name was Blanche Theobald, and there was a feature of this woman wearing this costume. It was a flowing gown, and like a royal type of a looking gown, and it was featured on the cover of Look magazine, which was one of the big, like, Life, and there were several big magazines back in the day, and Look was one of them, and it was a full page picture of her, and so she had the honor of doing that, and then I think my mother wore that same thing and did the same pose and took her picture in it. That, I think Gay has that picture somewhere, but she did that for a while. But anyway, getting back to the scripture thing, because of her talents doing that, was inspired to work on this scripture case idea. And so she stayed up late one night, and there was always a problem with the zipper. When you'd open the book, the zipper would want to spread, and she is the first one to come up with the idea of the wraparound zipper. And it was, it was revolutionary because nobody had done that. And so she was the first one to invent what became commonly known as, our scripture cases that you buy at Deseret Book, and wrap these things up. And that was her invention. She didn't patent it. And one of her counselors was Mrs. J. Reuben Clark Jr. And So she took the idea and ran with it and made a business out of it. And if you look at some of those old ones that were from the 60s, 70s, 80s, it has her name in there. And she could have been upset about that. Somebody took her idea and she never got anything for it. But instead of taking that, she was thankful that she was the the messenger, or the one that was able to make that creation, that really enhanced scripture and missionary work in a small way. Because everybody had them. I had them myself, and I still have them. So she was the inventor of that, and she was very creative. They got an idea. One of the other couples in the ward there in New York, were going to Columbia University, was Noel Black and his wife Norma, and they were a young couple, and they were friends, and they took a trip together up into the Catskill Mountains of New York, not far from New York City, but they just spent a weekend going up there as two couples, and they discovered this great big mansion up on a hill that was vacant. And it turns out it was a former governor of New York, Harriman, that was his summer home, a wealthy Jew. And this place was extensive. It was like a big hotel, had like a big dining room and a recreational hall with a stage and a big library and a huge lobby with a big, almost a walk-in fireplace. Of course, everything seems bigger when you're tiny, but they started a business. They acquired this place, and it had cabins going up, several outbuildings, 3 stories, and they had this idea of opening a summer camp there that catered to the Orthodox Jewish community. And so they went into great planning and got several other people involved in marketing and so forth, and they started this business. And my father was running his business down in the city, and he was supplying the money for supplies, and he would go to hotels that were closing and auctions to buy furniture, and he bought some elegant furniture to furnish this whole place. To my knowledge, that furniture is still in that building, but he worked hard to make this. And Noel Black and my mother and some others were up there running this place, and there was a lot of struggles involved and so forth. But it's all still during the time that my dad was having all of this trouble. The unfortunate consequence of this thing is that this Noel Black was kind of a philandering sort of man, and he set his sights on my mother, who was up there alone, and he was unhappy in his marriage and was trying to put moves on my mother. And my mother resisted for the longest time, for the first year or so, and we were up there for several years. And I grew up there. I wore a yarmulke. I was learning to speak Hebrew, and it was kind of a rich cultural experience for me, and had a lot of fun activities that we did. But eventually, the stress of my father's business and according to her, lack of attention, affection, all that kind of stuff, and horrible pressure she was undergoing, she made the mistake of getting involved with this Noel, and it was really the mistake of her life. It broke up our marriage, their marriage, and our family, and she ended up marrying him, but ultimately was not very happy. He was not faithful to her either. He was a cheater, and cheaters cheat, and so I know that she regretted the rest of her life that she'd gone down that road. But I think she felt she couldn't, that my father wouldn't take her back after all of that, or I think she would have, because I remember her talking to my bishop about it, and he maybe shouldn't have said that, but he said, "Oh, June would never take you back," So he must have asked him about it, and they were. I don't think he would ever take you back. But my dad remained single for many years, and there was one time when she came back on a visit, and we would all stay in the same house, and she was at the lot one time, and some people came by, and he introduced her to this man as his wife, and which kind of bugged my mom because she wasn't his wife. But anyway, I think that they would have gotten back together if things would have gone differently. But they did what they did, and it was unfortunate. I did. I did. Noel was a fun guy. He was very charming and fun personality. He was hard not to like, but my father didn't have much of an opinion after you know things had happened. His comment to me was that he's blacker than his name. That was his comment. And anyway, they ended up getting divorced in later years, and I think that was something that was the best thing to happen, because they went down the road of just getting more and more angry at each other and resentful for what had happened, and it didn't turn out well. But my mother spent her late years performing at church and serving in the temple, and serving as organist in both the Provo Temple and the Salt Lake Temple, and was always there for if anybody needed her. She loved to perform. She carried her music with her everywhere she went, and it was just the joy of her life was her music. And it's such a sad thing that things went the way they did, because both of them, everybody thought they were the ideal couple. They were just like meant for each other, and it was so sad that things happen. But Satan works his way into cracks, and there was some blame on both sides, but clearly there were mistakes made that were regretted, and I believe in my heart that all of that stuff is forgiven, and things are as they should be now.
So they were sealed, and
They were sealed. The ceiling was never broken. My mother would never do that, and I would never. None of us would ever support her wanting to do that. So there was never any question of that, and she never wanted to be sealed to Noel. My father was single for many years, and remarried in his late years, a couple of years before he died. And so I was happy that he was able to find a little bit of happiness with a younger woman. It's funny because she was from somewhere, I'm not sure where, Nicaragua or somewhere down there. And she did not speak good English. She didn't speak hardly any English, and he didn't speak Spanish. But somehow they communicated, and I'm sure he was excited to marry a younger woman. And I remember him saying to me, he said, "Gosh, I could actually have another family." I thought, "Go for it." But he never lived that long after that. But he was sealed to her, so he might have two wives in the next life.
he was sealed to her.
He was sealed to her as
What
well.
was her name?
Ruth.
Do you know her last name?
I'm not. I have a name in mind, but I'm not sure it's hers. I don't want to say the wrong name, but anyway, yeah, she was his wife the last couple of years. I feel bad that my father, he died right there at his business, just suddenly one day, just collapsed on the street. And when I got the phone call from my brother, I was so shocked I couldn't talk. I said, I have to call you back. It was like the very last thing. My father was such an energetic, vibrant sort of a man. It was just like turning a switch off, you know. He just dropped dead of a massive heart attack. And anyway, so we we went back there. I ended up quitting my job. My brother was already back there, and you know they were finishing the basement of my father's house on Long Island, and he was there to deal with it. But I was the only one in the family who was capable of dealing with his business. In fact, his business was still in my name, and so I was legal signatory on documents and so forth. So I went back there, and Randy and I worked together to dispose of his cars. He had a car lot full of cars and a mechanic shop, and there was a storage lot that he had that had 70 vehicles. I have 70 titles for cars that we could not figure out where this place was. And there was once or twice we got a lead on something. We'd jump in the car and race over there, and we'd find an empty lot. Oh yeah, those cars were moved several months ago, and we never found out where they were. So there, they got abandoned. I'm sure they got, you know, hauled away by somebody, but there were a lot of things like that that we just, you know, had no idea about. But I lived there for several months, and you know, took care of his affairs. And
I remember you saying that if you could have just had 15 minutes with your father before he died to find out some of these things.
oh yeah, oh yeah, it ended so suddenly. I mean, to get a phone call like that, nobody had a minute with him. I mean, he was there one minute and gone the next, which, you know, is a shock to everyone else. But really, you know, there's no better way of going than to just, you know, I would rather that happen and it be a shock to the rest of us than to him be sick in a hospital, dying slowly of cancer and having horrible, painful treatments for years, and finally, you know, dying. So both he and my mother passed relatively quickly. And since I'm on the subject, I'll talk about my mother's passing a few years ago. I guess it's been quite a few years ago now, maybe 14 years. But I got a phone call from my sister when I was on a trip. I was back in Minneapolis. I had hauled a load of cars there, and I had been hearing, I got a phone call saying that she wasn't well, and they took her to the hospital. She couldn't breathe. They gave her oxygen. She was fine. They took her home. But then the next night, she had the same problem. They went back, they x-rayed her lungs, and they found that she had an aggressive form of cancer that had just filled her lungs. And the only way she could live was by being on oxygen. And so Gay called me and said, you need to get back home. This isn't going to go very long. And so I was trying to find a load to go back there, and Minneapolis is kind of like a black hole when it comes to freight. There's a lot of stuff going in there, but not much going out. And so I, you know, it's expensive just to drive the truck empty. So I decided, you know, I'd wait another day or two. I get a phone call the next day, I believe, and my sister is saying, well, it looks like she's going now. She's in a coma, and her signs are fading, and they figure this is it. And do you want to talk to her? And I can hold the phone up to her ear. And so I said, yes, do. And so she did, and I started talking to her, and I said, Mom, I'm so sorry that I'm not there. I want to thank you for all that you've done for me, and how much I love you. And I'm going on like this. And all of a sudden, there's kind of gasps in the room. Her eyes open up, and she starts talking. She's like back, and so we talk a little bit. And I said, Mom, I'm coming, you know. So hang on. And so it was like, oh, okay, I guess that's not going to happen. So she was back, and then it was like the next day I get another call, same thing. She's going now, and so I said, well, put the phone up to her, and I start going on in the same way. It's hard for me to say because I get emotional about it, but my mother and I had a very special relationship. And anyway, she was passing away, and when she heard my voice, she woke up again, and the hospice nurse said, "I have never seen anything like that." it was like it was like shocking, you know. And she said to me, "Ricky, please come home." And I said, "Mom, I'll be there." And at that point, I just threw it in gear and I drove straight to make it home day and night. And I made it there. And the plan was that they were keeping her on oxygen until I got there, and then they were gonna, cut off the oxygen. And I was like, "No, you're not. I mean, I can't be a part of that. That's her lifeline." And so there was some contention about that, but everybody had been there for like a week, day and night, and it was kind of like, you know, this isn't going anywhere. But I drove there and I called my bishop because I was disturbed about it. I didn't know. I said, I can't be a part of like cutting a lifeline off from her. And anyway, I tried to get some counsel from him, and he said to me, "She's waiting for you." And so I made it there to her bedside, and there was everybody there, and she was so happy to see me, and so we spent the evening there as a family, and it got late, and some were impatient and were saying, let's just do this, and Randy, he said, "No, Rick hasn't had the chance to be with her. The rest of us have spent day and night with her. This is Rick's time, so we'll let him stay here with her tonight." And so they all left one by one, and I told her, I said, "Mom, I'm going to spend the night with you." And I remember her saying, "Oh, goody." She was excited about that, and so everybody left, and it was me and her, and we talked this and that, and she had this oxygen thing in her nose, and she kept fussing with it and pulling it out. And then I would put it back, and she'd pull it out again. And I put it in about the third time. She said, "Ricky, I don't want it." And so I said, "Okay." And so I let her not have it, and she gradually started to slip away. And so I called the others who hadn't even really gotten home yet. Some of them had traveled from Salt Lake. She was in Utah Valley. And so everybody turned around and came back again. And we all just were there with her as she gradually faded away. And I remember it kind of haunts me that she had a strong body. She was fighting it. And at one point, she was like laying asleep with her eyes closed, and then she, her eyes opened wide. She said, "Help me!" It's the last thing I heard her say, and I was like, wasn't anything I could do. But and we waited over, and it was about 5 a.m. when she finally breathed her last breath. But I was very thankful that I was able to be there and share those last moments with her. I was married the first time until I was 28, and so I really feel blessed that I was able to spend. Few children get to spend that much time with. I didn't have any problem living with her in her house. She liked me being there. I wasn't one of these people, "I got to get out of here, have my own place." I was happy to be there. Why wouldn't I want to be in some place where I felt loved and I could help and do different things? And so I did. And I went through my struggles with marriages too. And when I was single, I'd go and I'd spend time there. And so I was kind of, in a way, a surrogate spouse to her because she was not happy in her marriages, and it got bad. It got pretty bad toward the end until I suggested that we just, do a divorce. And I went down and got the paperwork, and we filled it all out. And it released the tension between those two because there was so much resentment that, no, was a great guy in many ways. He was a very fun person to have around. Always, there was some fun things about him, but the fact of the matter is he destroyed my family. But I didn't hate him. I loved the guy for the things that he did for me, and I learned a lot of things from him. It wasn't all negative, but it was. I think my mother realized that she threw something very valuable away for something that was of no worth, and she spent the rest of her days regretting it and having to live with him all that time. And he was unfaithful to her, and so it just made her more and more resentful. But she had no choice at this point, you know. And you get old, and you kind of like you can't afford to live alone, you know. And so anyway, it wasn't long until he had a stroke and went in the hospital, and Scott ended up taking care of him for quite a while, and that was a good thing for him. And my mother stayed in the house for as long as she could, and then it became, advantageous for her just to move around the corner to Gay's house, and we sold the house. And I had been helping him with the payments on their house, and we'd made an agreement that I would purchase their house, and so it was kind of a reverse mortgage type of a thing that I did with them. And anyway, so we ended up selling that back at that point, and Mom lived the rest of her years at Gay's house until she went into a rest home in Provo, and she enjoyed that place. Had a big grand piano, and she would go down there and play it whenever she wanted to, and had limited engagements to be going different places. But I think she enjoyed her last years, and looked forward to being with my father again soon. Okay, I'll talk about the Maxfields. It was always a fun thing to come to Utah. We would take a vacation out here every now and then. Usually it was conference time. My father would love to come out for conference, and I remember he would bring a car out, and there was this one time when we brought this old, I think it was like a 58 or 59 Plymouth wagon. And these are the old kind of wagons that had a door in the back that you could open up. And on this trip, he was the only driver. It was just him and us kids driving across the country in the wintertime. And it was Christmas time. And I remember that we wanted to have a Christmas tree. And so he pulled into a gas station that was closed, and there was some little Christmas tree that was laying there and thrown out because they'd closed for the Christmas holidays and it was over. And so he took it, but I'm sure to set an example for us, he stuck a few dollars underneath the front door of the place for taking it, so that he wouldn't be taking something for nothing. And we took this thing, and we got popcorn, and we strung popcorn on threads and kind of decorated this little tree, and had a good time doing that on this trip. And we got sick, and all of us got some kind of a stomach virus or something. So one after the next, we took our turns. He was driving relentlessly. He wasn't going to stop. And so we would just, when we had to throw up, we just opened the rear hatch and puked down the back of the tailgate. I remember when we got out here, my dad had to wash the car off, and there was these streams of chunks hanging down the back. But it was always a fun thing to have to come and see the Maxfields, because such a big, wonderful family, and they would come and visit us in New York from time to time, and it was always just the funnest time. We got to see our cousins. Having grown up in New York, I never met my cousins on the West Coast. The Nixons down in the Los Angeles area, and the Birds out in the Sacramento area. So it's a regret that I have that to this day I don't really have that much of a connection with them. And I didn't meet them, but on a rare occasion. And then, Uncle Dean as well. I saw him on a couple of reunion type things, but it was always a treat. Uncle Vard was this amazing guy. I remember, him he always thought that we should eat some candy before dinner, and that way you don't eat so much. He had his own little spin on nutrition that involved, right? I mean,
Right.
and but I always looked up to him. He was like this paragon of virtue and an ideal father, LDS man. He was a member of the Kiwanis Club, and he would come back for conventions. I didn't know anything about this stuff, but I remember there were several times he came out to New York for a convention, and we would get to see these guys, and we would play running bases out in the street, throwing the ball back and forth, and it was such a rare treat because I grew up in my early youth without family around. And so coming out here and visiting them was always a big deal. On this one trip that I drove across the country where I had these experiences, my favorite stop was to come over and to the Maxfield house and spend a couple of days there. And I was always amazed at Auntie Lane. She was this amazing woman that had the patience of Job. I mean, kids tugging at her and, hitting her and doing all kinds of things. And she was just mild-tempered, and I never saw her angry, not one time. And and it's hard for me to imagine that they're not in that house over there. I have such a clear memory of that house over there on the bench, and this kind of like pink sculptured carpet in the living room, and it was just it was always a fun thing to go there and visit. And I remember I took Nanette up on Ensign Peak in my Mustang one night, and we were up there, and she was such a cute little innocent. And we sat there and looked at the lights, and I remember asking her, I said, "You know what people do up here?" And she goes, "I don't know. Is it filthy?" And I said, "Yeah, it kind of is." But and Nanette and I have always been best pals. But it was they were amazing people, the whole family, and great examples to all of us. And it was always fun to go to the candy factory, and Aunt Ruth was always there working, and we'd always get like a bag of seconds, that they'd have in front. But Uncle Vard would take us through every time and give us a tour of. He'd have some new piece of machinery that he was showing how this worked and that worked, and all the people along the line doing different things. And then in later years, he had built a refrigerated section and expanded the company, and it was just always like this amazing place to go. And so I don't want to say the Maxfields are my favorite cousins, so I won't.
You can say whatever you want.
they are the best. I love every one of them. So my interest in guns and hunting, was I was able to actually do that not till after we moved to the West. And one of the things that I did gain out of our relationship with Noel Black was his brother his brother Burns Black had a ranch in Antimony, Utah, in a remote area, and I became quite close with that family, and they were wonderful LDS people. That Greg, my kind of a cousin through that marriage, was a best friend to me and a roommate. We're still like brothers, but we went hunting, and I just bought this rifle. It was a Marlin 30-30 lever action, and I'd taken it out on the mountain with a a group of guys, and we went on what's called a deer drive, where a bunch of guys walk through the woods to push the deer out into a clearing where other people can get a shot at it. And so we did this. It was not successful, but we were all piling back into the Jeep, which was at the end of the drive. And so I get in there, and we're like, I'm squeezed in the middle. So I get in there and lay my gun stupidly on my foot, and the barrel of my gun resting down there. And I realized at that moment that my gun was loaded and cocked, ready to fire. And so I thought, oh my gosh, I better take this off. And so I put my finger on the hammer, which, if you know what a 30-30 is, has a hammer like a pistol, an old revolver. And then you pull the trigger, you release it, which was really the wrong, stupid thing to do. And just as I'm in that position, my cousin gets in, bumps my elbow, and my finger, it snaps, and the gun misfires.
Uh-huh.
And I cocked that shell out. There was a dent on the back of it. It was brand new federal ammunition. It was a brand new rifle. There was no conceivable reason why that gun didn't fire, unless you believe in angelic intervention. I think that the Lord knew that I needed that foot for what I had to do in life. And I could have bled out. We were out in a very remote area. But that was something that I've never forgotten. I saved that bullet for years. I don't know if I still have it in a drawer somewhere, but that was a miracle to me. And there have been many miracles that have happened like that, but that was just something that came to mind. It was like, wow.